Hello and thanks for watching, and just before we start today's video, it's important that you know that today's recorded footage where I was testing today's SSD was recorded during the beta software update from Sony. Internet out there, everyone can take advantage of M.2 SSD upgrades, but this was recorded a few weeks ago when bench testing a whole pile of SSDs. So it is during the beta, but it still applies. I just wanted to let you guys know before we start today's video. Run the credits. Hello and welcome back, and that's right, it's time for another PS5 SSD expansion test. Today we are revisiting the MSI SPATIUM M480. What a horrible name this SSD has. It's a great SSD, but come on MSI, that naming convention, I don't like it. Anyway, get off track there. So the SSD we're utilising today, I'm a little close to the mic there, I do apologise, is this one, the MSI SPATIUM, and as you can see we've got a lot of capacity options to run through. We're utilising the 1 TB model today, and it's worth highlighting that this is our second test. We've already looked at this drive. As we can see, if we go through the specifications, it does have a sequential read of 7,000 megabytes per second and 5,500. Of course that is sequential and an idealistic number overall. And as this is the next stage of our testing, we are trying out 5 new games throughout our testing. But I will be keen to highlight to you that you should watch the previous video where we did look at 5 other games, namely Demon Souls, Ratchet and Clank, Resident Evil Village, Doom Eternal and GTA. And because in that one we also talked a little bit about the benchmark the PS5 gave that SSD and a bunch of transfers to and from. So you will be coming in on, you know, somewhat of a late page of the book if you haven't watched that already. But otherwise, let's carry on. So as you can see, there is our internal SSD storage, and there is the MSI M480 1TB. And these are the games we're doing today. We're going to be going through Borderlands 3, the PS5 version, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, In Rays of the Light, Subnautica, and Oddworld Soulstorm. Now we're going through all of these games largely because they are great examples of either world build or low texture polys or constant online kind of background loading, or they're games where they maintain a very high frame rate and SSD problems would be very, very obvious throughout. So let's go with our first game here. That is Borderlands 3. Once again, we've made sure that Borderlands 3 is on the internal SSD storage, and you may have noticed earlier on where there was also the data for the PS4 version over here. We've made sure to move the PS4 version over to the internal M.2 SSD storage, even though we're not actually going to be using it there. We are only going to be using Borderlands 3 here on the PS5, running from that MSI M480 SSD. So Borderlands 3 is a game that we are going to be comparing against the internal SSD, and we're going to be comparing it in the full game load. So let's go ahead, 3, 2, 1, go. I should add, anyone watching this, yes, we've gone through this several times, and I know it gets repetitious watching these same games getting loaded from different SSDs. Think how I feel. But at the same time, we've got to keep things fair, and we're trying to cover as many SSDs and as many games as we can before the SSD expansion option comes out of beta and into full release for everyone. We want to get as much information out there to get these SSDs covered, but keeping things as fair as possible. So here we are, we're moving it on, and there's Claptrap there. He barely made it into the second run of the screen. For those that didn't know, Borderlands 3 on the PS4 had some horrendous game load time. It's very, very slow, but things are a lot quicker in this version. So we're on the title screen. From here we can make our way into the save load. So from here I'm going to click continue. As you can see, signing in there means that we can't really do much in terms of that, because you know it's an online service. We're not going to include that in the loading. There's an extra variable there, and we're going to go ahead and continue my save spot there that's loading into an early part of Pandora. We've transferred over a save spot from PS4 save, but there's lots of progress here. So let's get these side by side and get it started. 3, 2, 1. Getting that loaded there, it should be absolutely fine. This isn't too tricksy a game. The main reason we're including Borderlands 3 isn't really for the save load, although of course we do include it. The reason we're including it is because this is a game that deals with a lot of texture problems when you go up close, or textures and low definition or low resolution textures don't get swapped out for high res ones as you move into the game. And also, a lot of the times you move through some of the larger areas of the game, all too common, you will hit an invisible loading wall there. So that's what we're kind of going for here, trying to push things as hard as we can in an effort to try and see if that SSD is going to feel stressed by what we are doing. But things still seem to be running pretty well here. I'm not really seeing any problems we're hitting here. If we come out of the game here and go towards maybe some textures, we can see there's no low definition textures there as we go. Things seem absolutely fine. And, you know, apart from obviously it being a bit pixelated for you guys as I'm compressing this 1080p recording there into the corner, things seem to be absolutely fine. So why don't we make our way into the next game, which is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now, this game, again, is the PS5 version. You've got that down there. We're not going to be tracking this game, let's load it now, from the XMB, largely because with this game, it is one that's got a whole manner of publisher logos. A lot of the loading is done mid-game in the background between scenes. Even the world transitions from the spaceship changing planet to planet are conducted without breaking the game with a load screen. That said, the load screens when they are in the game are pretty long. And I've got to say, even when I compare this against the PS4 loading time, there wasn't actually that much difference. They have certainly not improved a lot of the asset management in the loading screens between the PS4 and the PS5 version of this game. But nonetheless, we include this game because it's got a nice high frame rate, it deals with a lot of those heavy lighting effects, and because this is a game that has quite a lot of AI management in the background. So it's interesting to keep that in, to see if there's any problems there as we load stuff in. But for now, let's load the save in 3, 2, 1. And as we load into the game now, it should take, I think it's around about 8 to 10 seconds. I can't remember what the load time was on this precisely. I'm watching the MSI SSD load. You guys are the ones seeing it side by side. I won't see that until the edit. But we're in the game now. Still seems to be fine. We can make our way back into the lift area here. Again, I appreciate it's a little bit dark. Unfortunately, this is quite a dark game, and it's worth bearing that in mind. But again, I think we're fine here. We're seeing all the activity we want. And for now, we can go ahead and just sort of play around a little bit, see if there's any problems with the textures while we're doing this. Again, we can maybe move into the next segment if we choose to. And, you know, the lighting effects seem fine. Things seem to be running how I would like them to run, although I'm having massive camera issues there. But for now, what we're going to do is head back to the meditation bit there. And from here, we're going to go and load up one of the trial missions. Because that's another area where the game seems to have a kind of almost inexcusable load time for such small areas. And you'll see what I mean shortly. But the reason we're including it is just because it is something a completely kind of assets gathered from scratch right now in this next moment. So from here, we're going into the combat challenges, and we're going to side-by-side compare against loading the Kashyyyk mission here. So again, once that's loading up, and we're not going to play it for much longer before we move on to our next game in the Rays of Light. But 3, 2, 1. Loading it up there. And it's weird how these missions are close in loading time to the full mission load, which blows my mind, to be honest. I can't believe that is the case. But nonetheless, let's make our way in. And yes, the textures seem to be running fine for me. I would argue that this is exactly how I would expect it to behave. And again, nice and simple. It's going well, although I'm obviously getting absolutely dicked there. But, yeah, running fine. No drop in texture there. The next level is loaded nice and quick. Obviously, it's very tough to be able to compare those game versus game, simply because what we are doing in each scenario is very different. But we do have a lot of AI here running which although is largely GPU and running from the memory, it's worth highlighting that that's still nice that you can see all that happening. But nonetheless, let's make our way onto the next game. And again, the next game is a lovely indie title that you may have heard of called In the Rays of Light, In the Ray of the Light even. And again, this is a game that we're testing from the load screen. We're not going to be looking at this from the title screen here. So with this one, we're loading two different areas of the game that are actually quite close together, but at different stages of the game. And the reason we include in Rays of the Light is because it has arguably less efficient loading than every other game that we're talking about today. Obviously, it's a far more indie-based project, and they're using a lot of very impressive assets, but nonetheless, a lot of the loading here is going to be nowhere near as kind of carved and maintained for efficiency as it would in a big title, although you'd say that with those horrendous load times on JEDI. Nonetheless, we're moving into save game number 3, where we'll go into the open world environment there. So let's go ahead in 3, 2, 1. And we're in the world. It's lovely and quick. We can make our way onto the outside. And there is the outside of the area, some kind of campus. We've got like the environment there. And again, I'm not going to say this is the most cutting edge game, but it is a game with a lot of assets and a lot of stuff on screen, which for an indie title generally means that, you know, the background management and loading on the fly, and definitely texture pop when things go between high, low and medium res transitions as you move through the world, they're not going to be handled quite as slickly or as you might find in an AAA title ideally. But nonetheless, it still seems to be running fine. I'm sorry if it seems a bit pixely for you guys there. The world still seems to be largely intact. Even the buildings there in the distance seem fine. As we move through the world there, everything seems in place, even the graffiti as we move towards it. Is that going to pop into a low texture? But it doesn't. It's maintaining and changing and transitioning into those different texture types as we go. But for me, that looks pretty much done, and I would agree that that's running exactly how I would like it to run. So for now, let's move out of this game and move into, or stay in the game, what am I saying, and move into the next save. And let's go in 3, 2, 1. Another quick one there before we proceed into the very dark area. We can travel backwards into this area here, this kind of bunker segment of the game. Very dark, very low light. Not a huge number of textures to play with there, but nonetheless, there's still a lot of assets around. And although this door's shut here, there's still a lot of world assets that I'm forcing the game to draw in. So from here, we're going to make our way into the darker element of the game and a few of the kind of surrounding objects. And you're going to see a lot more of the textures up close as well. So let's see if the game doesn't try to bumble its way through that, and it actually shows us stuff that we want to see. Let's get that gate open. As we move through each of the textures and have a look around, it still seems to be running fine. You can hear the vibration of the controller going absolutely nuts during this segment of the game. But right now, I'd say that's running absolutely fine by me. There's no drop in frame rate, and the lighting effects and indeed the textures are running absolutely fine even when you get close to them. Let's make our way into the next game, Subnautica. Now, Subnautica, a PS4 game. Again, we're going to judge this from loading from creative mode. Now, with Subnautica, it's an open world game. It's a sandbox game. It's a survival game. Basically, it's a game with a whole world of assets. You've seen Conan Exile, you've seen The Forest, you've seen Green Hell, you've seen all of these games. Christ, you've seen Skyrim. These are the sort of games that have a lot of assets in them. And we're going for creative mode here. We're very quickly going to explore the world, and we're just going to move through it just a little bit to make sure that the textures remain high and everything's fine there. So let's go in 3, 2, 1. Another thing, of course, I love this loading screen, particularly for editing videos, because it's really retro, but also because we've got measurements here that we can compare the internal SSD against that of this MSI drive loading the same data. We've got a few metrics there we can compare in terms of timing And we've got metrics we can compare there in terms of individual assets. But we're in the game now. Let's make our way into the seabed and go through. Didn't really want to use any of that. That's my fault. I'm not going to blame the game for me tapping circle out of that animation. But if we see there moving up, we can have a little look around, and there is the world around us there. So let's go ahead and have a bit of an exploration. So moving through, once again, it's absolutely fine. It's nice and straightforward. Again, we've got all of the usual stuff that we can use to control the character. And this is normally where you would see, if there were any problems, your major texture problems. If there was something that wasn't going to load in. Some of the early versions of this game definitely suffered from that, where you would be playing the game and you definitely got the vibe that some of the textures you were looking at were not being loaded in correctly, and you were looking at the distance textures, maybe the mid textures. We're not seeing any of that now, but that is the sort of thing we would look for and why we include this game in our testing. But for now, we can make our way along, and here we are on the bed, and it seems fine. So for now, let's make our way towards the surface, and from here, we'll be able to test those water graphics, because again, that's another area where there's a large amount of secret loading that's going on. If we move backwards as well, we'll be able to move up into the area and have a look at some of that transition, but it seems absolutely fine. We've moved quite a long way away from the survival vessel there, but for me, I'd say that's running fine. And now we can move into our final game, which is Oddworld. Oddworld Soulstorm. We're loading into it here. Once again, we're not gauging this game based on the title screen load. There's publisher logos, there's usual sort of stuff. It's just going to be easier for us to load from here with no online connectivity at all present. It shouldn't be problematic. But for now, let's make our way into the game, loading from our save game in 3, 2, 1. Heading in, it's quite a quick load there. We've got the world that we can explore around us. Again, we have already kind of set, there's been a lot of fire behind us there, so we're not really going to go that way. But again, we can have a look at the world, and it's going to trigger lots of kind of background animation. It's quite dark, I appreciate that. But again, this is a game that moves at quite a hefty pace, and one that's actually got quite a lot more going on than people give it credit for, because this is an open world environment with lots of these assets needing to trigger activities throughout. Now, again, I am kind of watching this game with a slight delay while I'm playing it. Consequently, it's not always going to run as smooth for me as you guys can see it on screen. But for now, it's running absolutely fine to me. I'd say it is doing exactly what I'd want the game to do in terms of activity. And there's been no slowdown, no asset pops, no problems whatsoever. And for now, I would call that a success for me personally on what it is doing. So for now, that is the final part of the second stage of testing on this drive. We've still got some third stage testing to go, but let's have a little look, whatever that is there. But for now, let's go ahead and head back to the title screen here and move those games back over to the internal PS5 SSD for another test, but also to summarize what we've seen today. Select all, transfer them over, and boom. So, this SSD, what do we think? In both scenarios when utilising this SSD, I've not encountered any problems. I never really had much doubt about the MSI M480. There was the odd bit of frame rate, I remember, when we did the Resident Evil 8 testing previously, but nothing I would call significant. Additionally, now, as I mentioned this in my Crucial MP600 Pro video, I should say, with the top tier range of SSDs and the WD Black, the Firecuda 530, the Samsung 980 Pro, and ones like that, either selling out quite heavily or the price is suddenly spiking due to a lot of marketing on those companies' parts talking about their compatibility with PS5. The result has been that top tier has become way more expensive than it needs to, and therefore a lot of buyers, maybe including yourself, have been looking at that second tier. The Aorus 7000S from Gigabyte, the Corsair MP600 Pro, the Sabrent Rocket Plus. All of these SSDs I consider the second tier. There is a third tier with a bunch of low-level PCIe4 drives like the Q4 from Sabrent, the Firecuda 520, and even that Silicon Power US 70. but it's that middle layer that seemingly gives us that large amount of sequential read that we're being told the PS5 needs, but has better availability and better pricing than some of those big gun SSDs at the top. And I'd say right now, of all of the SSDs in the middle group, I'd say this one's second. The Aorus 7000S from Gigabyte is still my favourite of the second tier SSDs, but this one certainly comes very, very close. And it's only its lack of heatsink by default that really lets it down, in my opinion. They're very close in every other regard, but you've got to love that Aorus heatsink there. Otherwise, this is a great SSD, and if you are looking at this SSD, maybe on Black Friday or on some kind of promo, then it's definitely worth a good shout. Also, it's available at 2TB at a very reasonable price, even right now. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I know these videos are super repetitive, looking at the same games on different SSDs, but that's how we keep uniformity. We have to test the same things. We can't compare them with different games. Hence why we've blocked all these into different videos as well, rather than one video that bench tests 15 or 20 games. This allows us to put all of the games into blocks, and also allows us to champion different games because of their different loading techniques, hence how we've separated these games out. But if you have enjoyed this video, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe. There's more SSDs for me to cover. I will be looking at more SSDs. I've still got the Gamix X70 to look at. I've still got the Team Group Qaeda drive to look at. There we've even got the Microns as well to look at. So there's more SSDs still on their way for videos, so do check those out. And do visit the links in the description to different SSDs that I have been recommended in the first and the second tier of storage in terms of price and service, linked in the description, along with links to a bunch of heatsinks that I certainly recommend. And finally, if you need free advice, head to the free advice section over on NAS Compares. Genuinely free. It's manned by me and Eddie the Web Guy. We dish out free advice to anyone that needs it for NAS, for DAS, for RAID, for Thunderbolt, for cloud, you name it. There's a few donate buttons there. Ignore them if you want. It's impartial advice. It may take an extra day or two to answer your inquiries because we are only humans with human lives, but we do answer everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time.